There we go. Okay. Welcome, everybody. It is good to see some familiar faces and many more familiar names. I'm so glad you're joining today. If you've been attending the webinars that we host at Cooperatives First, a lot of them are focused on process. They're focused on the technical stuff, the nuts and bolts about how cooperatives work and how to be successful. Today, we're shaking it up a little bit. We're going to try kind of a new spin with some slightly higher level discussions about co-op governance. Um, in particular, five things that all co-ops could do to elevate the governance conversations they have and maybe how they perform on the governance front and member engagement front with their members and boards. Before I get into that, however, I'd love to do a round of introductions, but we do have quite a few people, so that would take us a while. So if folks could hop in the chat and let us know your name, where it is you're joining us from, and what co-op or organization that you're representing today, that'd be great. We love seeing the diversity of organizations and places that people come from. I personally, as a geography major in university, I also just like knowing how much reach we have. Usually we have someone in these from central or southern parts of Africa. But I don't think that's the case today, but we'll see. We'll see how far our reach is today. Let me pull up. I do want to start our meeting in a good way. And so we'll do a land acknowledgement before starting our session. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're located on Treaty 6 territory. Our home office is here in Saskatoon on Treaty 6 territory, and that's home of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and Métis nations. We acknowledge that this land was not ceded, but that the purpose of the treaties was to ensure the land would be shared. Indigenous people have been cooperating in these territories for thousands of years, and it is through cooperation that all our communities will continue to thrive. As I'm seeing folks introducing themselves in the chat, I see we've got folks from all across Western Canada and indeed Turtle Island. And so if you want to take a moment and recognize the people and the ancestors of the place you call home, that's a great way to start our meeting today with a good intention. Hey, all right, let's get into it. I'll be sharing my screen for the majority of today's session. If folks would like the slides, as well as today's recording, I'll share those later on this week once we get them up on the website. Whoop. Big, there we go. Okay, can everyone see that okay? Yeah, excellent. Okay, so yeah, today we're talking about 5 things your board can do to elevate your co-op's governance. In these sessions and in conversations about governance, we often lead with discussions about the board rather than membership. And that's, again, every co-op is going to be different in how they approach this. In our work, usually the board is going to take leadership. Although they're answerable and accountable to members, and members very much should guide your co-op's work, the leadership and the culture that's facilitated by your co-op is principally a priority of the board of directors. And so that's why we put this forward as some suggestions for the board to consider, to entertain. Okay, so what are the 5 things we're talking about? First off, we're going to talk about a little bit about what governance is, just to make sure we're all on the same page. What is governance? Why is it important? And then our 5 things, if you're really familiar with these, maybe you won't stick around, but I hope you do. The 5 things. 1, we're going to use a stakeholder governance perspective. 2, we're going to facilitate diversity on our board. 3, we'll pursue or keep in mind a quintuple bottom line when it comes to operations. 4, as a cooperative, we're going to reject isomorphism. And 5, as co-op leaders, we are going to engage authentically with our cooperatives, members, and other key stakeholders. So those are the five things we're going to talk about today. I could probably do a part two with five more things we could do to elevate our governance. But I think these are important. I've been taking part in a couple of governance forums for some professional development and just hearing really different perspectives from different sectors, from the corporate sector, from crown corporations, from nonprofits, from other big cooperatives, small cooperatives, and these really stick as things that, given the unique characteristics of co-ops and credit unions, I think these five things are really worth talking about and maybe challenging some of the ideas that we as co-op leaders hold. And finally, if you do have questions at any time throughout this session, fire them away in the chat. We will have time at the end for Q&A. We'll recap everything in the chat, and then if you want to ask a question as well at the end, that's you're more than welcome to do that. But first, I have a question for you. Let's use our poll function, and let's just get a sense of what are some of the pressing governance challenges that you're facing in your cooperative. I have a long list for you to choose from. Choose all that apply to you. I'll give you all a chunk of time to answer this, but these are some of the things that we hear from our clients. It's things I hear a lot when I have a cohort of board members in our governance course. Yeah, these are some of the key issues that keep recurring when there's discussions about governance challenges, governance failures. So yeah, let's hear from you guys. What are some of the most pressing issues you're facing today in your co-ops? I'll give you another 20 seconds or so. As I'm watching the results come in, I kind of see the ones I expected are most common. Only one that has no votes, which is actually quite encouraging. Okay, give it 5 more seconds or so. Okay, I think we can probably call it there. Let's end the poll. Let's share the results. There we go. So I kind of figured member engagement or member apathy and participation were going to be the biggest. In our work with large cooperatives, inattentive members, apathetic members, members who don't understand co-ops, poor AGM turnout, not getting enough candidates running for the board, people underappreciating what a co-op is. Those are almost always big issues that keep co-op leaders awake at night. And it's hard to overcome. You know, if you're a board of a co-op with 400,000 members, boy, you can't realistically engage everybody. So how do you overcome those challenges of member apathy? Other big ones, navigating partnerships, HR, familiarity with co-ops, recruiting directors, strategic issues. Those are all big. Or moderate. Only one has an issue with CEO or management. We don't need to name names, but I think the literature on governance definitely indicates that is a perpetual possible issue for organizations. And then none chose conflict among directors. Wonderful. That's great. If you've got a good board and you're working together great, you're in a good place for elevating those conversations then. Okay. All right. Thank you all for indulging that. It's always good to know, keep a finger on the pulse of what issues folks are facing. Okay, so let's get on the same page about what governance is, what we're talking about, and why it's important. We like a simple definition for governance at Cooperatives First. It's simply who gets to decide what, who makes what decisions, who bears what responsibilities, and who is accountable to who. So, of course, our board holds management and the CEO accountable. They are in turn reporting to and accountable to the members, and our members are our highest authority in a cooperative. That's pretty consistent with all other corporate bodies, nonprofit societies, business companies, crown corps to an extent, all bear out that same corporate structure. And the Co-operatives Act that deals with, the basics of corporate governance are pretty consistent across different corporate forms. The standards are partially set out in law. So if you read the section about directors' duties of any Co-operatives Act, you'll see some standards that need to be met. In many cases, those are defined as your fiduciary duties, your duty of care for the cooperative, your duty of loyalty. But in many other cases, those standards are determined through Canadian case law. And some of what I'll talk about, some of the practices that some cooperatives adopt are more informed not by what's required of them in law, but by what's been teased out in the courts. So as a way for a cooperative to excel or reduce liability, there's different standards that are being adopted. And so we'll touch on that as we get to it. Why is governance important? If we look back at the last 20 years in Canada, we have some really noteworthy co-ops that have failed. We have Co-op Atlantic, we have the BC Tree Fruits Co-op, we have Mountain Equipment Co-op's sale of assets, we have Co-op Atlantic, we have the Saskatchewan Wheat Pool. We have some really notable issues in really, important co-ops. And if you look at the case of each of those, and there are wonderful case studies, we've got some material on our website and in our courses, and our partners at the Canadian Centre for the Study of Cooperatives have also put out a ton of research on all of those cooperatives. BC Tree Fruits being the most recent and has some forthcoming literature on that. But if you dig down into what's happening in those organizations prior to their failure, you see people making the wrong decisions. You see them making poor investments. You see them saddling themselves with a ton of debt. You see them alienating the membership of the co-ops and adrift away from the co-op's core purpose. In many cases, as Murray Fulton and Peter Couchman state in a great article, they view cooperation as the problem. And so central to that is how a co-op governs itself. And so governance failure can lead to organizational failure. And so that's why we prioritize conversations about governance, because if you have good governance, your operations will usually be set up for success. What does governance look like in practice? And we'll touch on a few of these things. And I kind of want to parse out the big differences for the folks that may be in the room. A big part of determining who gets to decide what is whether you act or appoint. And most organizations, as they grow, will appoint a lot more of their responsibilities. So the board will eventually appoint a CEO, and that CEO will take over most operational tasks. That CEO will hand off things to middle managers and then to frontline staff. But for small cooperatives, for those that have just started, you might be serving on what's called a working board. And that's most of the groups we work with. And bless them, they work hard. And in that case, you may have, the board are the only members of the co-op, and they have to take on the duties of a normal board. They have to take on the duties of a manager. They have to take on the duties of the frontline staff. They're doing everything. Even in those cases, it is still important to dedicate some time and thought to your governance. It's a way to set yourself up for success, make sure you're making the best decisions possible, and people are performing in a way that's consistent with good standards and just good practice. For co-ops that are a bit more mature, that have what's called a policy board, where the board makes strategic decisions, they set policy, they set direction, they report to members, and they receive information and reports and hold accountable the CEO and management. It's important for them to also know their place and adopt what's called a nose in, fingers out approach, where you stick your nose in the business of the cooperative and you ask questions and you interrogate why things are happening this way, and you make sure that things are performing good, but generally you keep your fingers out. You don't meddle in the affairs of the cooperative. So knowing your role is central to good governance. Okay, now that we're all on the same page, let's work through these. I'm going to call them calls to action. These are 5 things that I think all co-op boards should have a discussion about around the board table. You don't necessarily need to phrase them exactly this way, but I'm going to pose a couple of questions and challenge a couple of accepted norms in co-op governance that I do think all boards should discuss. So let's get into it. The first of these is stakeholder governance. And stakeholder governance, for those who might not be familiar, is a concept that emerges in the 90s, but really catches wind in the 2000s, and it challenges what's called shareholder governance. If folks are familiar with Friedman, Friedman's theory is that corporations exist to create value for shareholders. Every decision must be in service to that. And inferring from that, cooperatives adopt something similar. Many cooperatives have a member-focused purpose, a member-focused decision-making, and I think a lot of cooperatives really hone in on the importance of serving members first and foremost, if not only. Some of the cooperative principles add to that a little bit. Concern for community, I think, is one of them. And therein, I think, comes the discussion that co-ops should have about stakeholder governance. Stakeholder governance is simply the practice of adopting a much broader perspective when considering key actors and how decisions made by the board will affect those various actors. And so that might include, if you're making if you're setting your strategic plan and you're considering who will be impacted by different targets, who might need to be consulted, you might consider certainly the members, the owners of the company, but you should also be considering staff. You should be considering customers who are non-members. You could consider suppliers. You can consider your neighbors, fellow businesses in the business park, maybe where you operate, local governments that are affected by your co-op. It's a shift away from shareholder or member-focused governance, where everything is in service to the betterment of that singular actor, to a much broader perspective. Why is that important? Why are organizations doing this? Corporations have been forced to consider this and are making leaps and bounds. There's some important case law that happened in the early 2000s. I want to say it's centered around Bell as well as another airline. And the lack of consideration given to key stakeholders. In that case, I think it was bond holders over stockholders of a corporation, resulted in a corporation being found liable for losses based on key decisions. And so the court really encouraged, and the Business Corporations Act of Canada has been amended to really try to steer organizations away from that singular focus of serving shareholders and creating value, more towards being a good community citizen as a corporation, and then being a good steward in your community and in the work that you do. We have seen in cooperatives a really big discussion about staff and the role of what's called HR stewardship. So while boards shouldn't be meddling per se in the affairs or the employee relations of their co-op, it is perfectly acceptable, I would say, for the board to set the tone for how an organization should perform when it comes to human resource management. And again, using their judgment and how they want to be perceived and received as an organization, it makes sense certainly for a board to do that. And in doing so, and why you might pursue this, is you're going to have that broader perspective. You're going to seek out additional consultation with the hope of getting ahead of conflicts. By being really mindful of how affects our supply chain and how it affects our supplier network, maybe we can curate a better reputation as a company. Maybe we can get ahead of any disputes over contracts with suppliers. Maybe we can have, a culture that supports our employees, whether they're unionized or not, and that'll, pay dividends when it comes to having conversations and maybe avoiding labor disputes. And so having that broader perspective and ensuring that there's just consideration paid to the various stakeholders involved in your cooperative can have real financial impacts. So how do you do that? Have conversations. Consult your members, of course, consult your staff, receive reports and information from people. Conduct staff surveys, get a sense of how people are receiving the organization and what we can be doing as a board to help curate good experiences with us across the board. Include a broader perspective when you're completing a risk management exercise. Consider not only the impact to the membership and how they use the cooperative, although that is important. Consider also, the effect on staff, on organized labor, on the businesses that surround you, on the organizations you work with. And in all of that, prioritize the well-being of the cooperative more broadly. So be mindful of everyone involved, and try to encourage that perspective when making decisions. Okay, number 2, and shifting gears quite a bit here, facilitate diversity. If you've gone through any of our courses at Cooperatives First or read some of our content on governance, this is a theme that comes up a lot. And we keep bringing it up because we're making really slow progress in the co-op space. The corporate world is definitely making leaps and bounds in ensuring that there is diversity in boardrooms as well as in the C-suite of companies, the executive managers of companies. And so simply put, we're talking about diversity on your board, diversity of people. What I would encourage all co-ops to do, because I'm also sensitive to the realities of where your co-op works, is you should ensure that your co-op's board looks like the community you serve. Interpret that how you will. Diversity can mean a lot of different things. Broadly, we're talking about lived experience. You want a more diverse slate of people who bring different ideas, different perspective from the different lives that they've lived. More specifically, this could refer to age, gender, ethnicity, professional background, educational attainment, any number of things. Any number of things make us diverse. I'm very sensitive to the fact that if you're in a really, really small town in, Saskatchewan, you might not have the most diverse population. You might have an older population, a less ethnically diverse population. So like you have the realities that you're working with. But why would you consider this? Time and again, the research shows that more diverse boards will perform better financially. The data shows that boards that have more women will perform better financially. Why is that? Maybe it's because they make better decisions. Maybe they better manage risk. Different people with different perspectives will point out different issues, and that'll inform the decisions and direction the co-op takes. But the data does show that more diverse boards will perform better. And so it makes sense to prioritize this. Social psychologists and economists refer to this phenomenon as super additivity, wherein diverse minds come together to create something that more than the sum of their parts. And so a board that is diverse, a team that is diverse and well synced up will be able to perform better than any one of them should be able to. And so again, there's something to be said for teams that work well together, that have those different perspectives, that can engage in productive conflict with each other and curate the best decisions. Again, the corporate world is already ahead of us on this one. In the US, there's legislation introduced to encourage boards to be more diverse for publicly traded corporations. And again, if we think about what that means to people, seeing different people and demographics represented in organizations, I think that's just something that we should value in society. So aligning yourself with how your community looks and helping facilitate that representation could then also lead, I think, to greater member participation. So again, I recognize that it's sometimes challenging to facilitate that. Boards should definitely be talking about what recruitment looks like, because as a cooperative, because we have free open elections, you could just say, well, the members choose, it's a popularity contest, and we get what we get. I think we can do better as co-ops, and so having some sort of director recruitment plan where we at least encourage diverse nominees to step forward is something we're spending a little bit of time on. We've had a separate webinar. You can find the recording on our website about creating a director recruitment plan. Definitely check that out if that's something you're interested in pursuing. But simply doing things like targeted advertising, working with important community groups in your area to promote the co-op and encourage folks to run for the board. Shoulder tapping, key candidates that could bring new perspective, new ideas onto the board. That always works well, especially in small towns where you've only got a couple thousand people. And then have a committee. Lots of co-ops already have governance committees. Add nominations to their portfolio. Potentially have interviews, have very open and honest, frank conversations with potential candidates, encourage key people to run, and share with members, the goals that a co-op has when it comes to facilitating diversity, why they're doing it, can help get ahead of some of those hard conversations. So facilitating diversity because it's often in the best interest of the co-op. Number 3, consider adopting a quintuple bottom line. I'm sure folks have heard all the different versions of this. I kind of get a little bit fatigued with the shtick that comes from the various MBA holders that, pitch a triple bottom line, a quadruple bottom line, a quintuple bottom line now. However, I think this one goes hand in hand with the ideas of stakeholder governance. I think it aligns nicely with the co-op principles. And when we think of these 5 Ps, I think this just fits really well with how a cooperative should be thinking. So what is your quintuple bottom line? It's when a organization, or in this case, a co-op, pursues hitting key objectives as it relates to their purpose, which for cooperatives is to provide goods and services and opportunities for members. It prioritizes profit. It prioritizes people. And in a cooperative, we should be thinking, of course, about our staff, our members, our suppliers, our neighbors, our community more broadly. We should be thinking about our planet. The release of the Sustainable Development Goals has created some conversations about how do we connect the co-op principles with the Sustainable Development Goals. And we should prioritize place. And as cooperatives that are locally owned, usually serve a very specific region. I think many co-ops already do a good job of prioritizing place. But yeah, keeping that community focus and how we serve as a good corporate community citizen is something that co-ops should work towards. So adopting something like this can certainly shift a little bit the conversations we have when setting our strategic objectives and building out a strategic plan. It shifts us a little bit away from what I think co-ops already focus on, which is probably those first 3. Delivering on our purpose, generating a profit to be sustainable, and supporting our people, particularly members, to just, again, opening that up a little bit and making sure that we're not just a successful business, we are a successful community-based organization. And doing this, again, offers a good framework, and we can build in some accountability here. I won't go too much into this, But certainly if folks want to explore this, there's lots of great material out there on building a quintuple bottom line and what markers of success you could use. So how you might measure that in your annual report and deliver on different objectives for those 5 bottom lines. Okay, number 4. I'm going to speed along a little bit here. Number 4, I think, is one of the most important things cooperatives need to be mindful of, because I think we're actually really, really bad at it. And that's rejecting isomorphism, which is a really fancy way of saying be different. This is a really common theme in co-op literature. Or it's becoming a really important theme. And a colleague of ours at the Co-operators has really touted this as something that co-ops especially need to pay attention to. Isomorphism is simply the concept that businesses that operate in the same industry will, over time, adopt the same practices as each other. And if we think about retail, for example, if you walk into a grocery store, you're going to have virtually the same experience regardless of who owns it. If you walk into Walmart, Safeway, Freshco, Superstore, Co-op, you're going to have a pretty similar experience. And that trend for customer service and customer experience often extends to pricing strategies, to store layouts, to what specials we give, to the profit margin we try to generate on different lines of business, to what we pay our staff, to how much profit we return to shareholders or members, how we lease space, how we own space. Many more than just, say, putting milk in the back corner is the same across different industries. Banking is another really big one. More and more and more, our credit unions feel the pressure to look and act and do the same things as Canada's major 5 banks. And in doing so, they're entering a race that they're almost set up to lose, because our corporate competitors have much deeper pockets. They have almost access to endless resources that many cooperatives and credit unions do not. And so when a cooperative becomes isomorphic and looks and acts and behaves just like its competitors, it often loses some of its cooperative identity. It's prioritizing competition with corporations over cooperation. And if we look at some of those big co-op failures, most of them did that. Most of them started playing somebody else's game and shifted away from what the co-op was set up to do, which was to serve members and deliver on a specific purpose. And so rejecting that idea and questioning the culture we create, the standards that we accept, and some of the practices that we engage in, I think is an important conversation for cooperatives, to make sure that we are, yes, serving our members and meeting their expectations, but we are also maintaining a unique value proposition beyond just the services people get at the till or when they walk through the door. And so boards should have a conversation with their managers about what industry standards they're seeking to meet, whether they should reject those, whether it fits with their values and their purpose. Have a conversation with your membership about what they expect from your cooperative, and place your co-op's values, your purpose, your mission, vision, values at the center of that. Those should really guide some of those key operational decisions that get put into place. And because most people who either work for a co-op or serve on the board of a co-op or start a co-op are doing so for the first time, you might want to pursue some education on what co-ops are, how they work, and how they can be different, to ensure that the stakeholders who are involved in that are all on the same page. But one of the biggest challenges we see is that co-ops and credit unions start playing somebody else's game, trying to match somebody that they're probably not going to win a race against. And that can be a huge problem when a co-op heads down that path. It's really hard to extricate yourself from it. Okay, last one. Engage authentically. And this is one I feel really passionate about. As a board member, as someone who guides boards and has discussions with boards, this is something that is so achievable, and it's so low cost, but it makes such a big difference. Um, Engage authentically with your members, with your staff, and with your key stakeholders. Time and again, you can go to any organization's AGM and you're going to receive a very scripted, very controlled message and overview on how the co-op's performing. Most people don't like that. Most people want authenticity when they show up and when they have discussions about an organization that affects their lives personally. And so if you're looking for input from members, if you want to engage your membership and your staff, do so meaningfully. Be frank, be open, be honest, explain some of your rationale, share with folks, their role in the organization and actually follow through on that. Some of my favorite moments that I've had in co-op and corporate governance are just the Q&As, that happen at member meetups, engagement sessions, or AGMs when people have frank, slightly mean questions for their co-op's board management, because it's meaningful, it's real. You're being authentic when you have those conversations with folks. And so a tiny bit of conflict can go a long way in helping people get on board with supporting their co-op. And in all of that, I think co-ops should make membership meaningful. Your members are the owners of the cooperative. Boards report to them. And so don't treat them as a box that needs to be ticked. Treat them as the owners of the company. So seek their input, seek their guidance, run things past them, not just at the AGM. Create opportunities for members to participate and for members to really understand what it means to be a member of their co-op. Because of course, I mean, here in Saskatoon, we've, I think, got about 120,000 members of Saskatoon Co-op. How many of them identify as the owners of the business? Probably a small fraction. And so provide a little bit of education so people can participate fully. That inauthenticity is a chief sign of isomorphism. Our big banks, our biggest corporations, of which most industries only have, 4 to 6 big corporations that control much of the business in the Canadian market. They have very few huge shareholders that they report to, and so that inauthenticity can be accepted. The way that co-ops can stand apart is by really embracing that co-op identity and create, a rally for their members to come together and do business differently. And you never know. You never know what you're going to learn. When you have those big, open, honest conversations with members, good ideas may come from them. Again, people with different lived experiences, different perspectives, they can bring a lot to the table and offer some insights that a board might not be considering. So some advice I would give to do that, just throw out the script. Set your agenda, do what you need to do, but dedicate time to engaging with members and having conversations. A big Q&A might be okay, but consider meeting with your membership at least once per quarter. Have some sort of forum where people can show up, have conversations, talk about their co-op, learn a little bit, offer insight, and who knows what challenges you might overcome. You might get more participation. You might get more nominations coming to the board. Hopefully you see revenue tick up as people understand and appreciate their role a little bit more. But just look for ways to engage with people. Newsletters, social media, those are all easy things that we probably already do. And all we have to do is curate our message, curate our tone a little bit, and open things up to help people participate and engage authentically. Okay, those are my 5 things. I do want to get a little bit of feedback from y'all. Is this something you're already doing? I know stakeholder governance in particular is something that a lot of organizations already adopt. Is this something you want to work on? Um, Let me know. Choose all that apply to you. Um, do you want to do more on any of those 5 things? Do you want to learn more? Are you already doing it? Or hey, you've got this in the bag. You're doing it already. Um, if so, you're maybe ahead of the curve. But yeah, let us know. I'll let the poll run for about a minute or so. Let me know what you want to work on or what you're already doing. Okay, we'll do maybe 5 more seconds. Give those last few people a chance to weigh in. I'll be honest, I like what I see. Okay, share the results. Okay, so engage authentically is what most people said. We could probably do a little bit better. That's perfectly fine. I would say no organization does this perfectly. It's something we can always work towards doing better, adopt new practices, try new things. And it's usually fairly low cost to be authentic with people. So it's not a risky business. Um, Nobody chose we already have, which I feel a little a little vindicated in this topic. So I feel good about that. But yeah, it's good to see that a lot of folks are already working on at least some of these. That's wonderful. A few folks said I need to learn more. Yeah, if folks are interested in this, do let me know in emails when I follow up. More than happy to pursue any of these, or maybe bring in some additional speakers who could weigh in a little bit more on some ideas to share with folks. Okay, thanks everyone for indulging that. Let's wrap up a little bit. If you like these sessions, if you like this sort of content and maybe you want to dive a bit deeper than, say, a 40-minute webinar, we've got a whole bunch of online resources. All of these webinars are recorded. They're all posted online. And so if you want to watch any of these or share them with your teams, by all means, feel free to do so. If you check out the Co-op Creator, coopcreator.ca, you'll find a whole heap of tools, templates, how-to guides, things that help a co-op get started and continue running for success. If you want to do a really deep dive and you want to hear me talk a whole bunch more, consider one of our online courses. All of them are online, totally self-paced, and completely free. In particular, our Good Governance Matters course is a really good deep dive on some of these key concepts applied to case studies. It's a really great course that I would encourage anyone who serves on a co-op board to go through. And then our Introduction to Cooperatives course is really quite good if you're new to co-ops. If you want to, learn some of the key questions to be asking, whether you're a staff member, a member, or a board member, that course kind of has a good take for anybody, despite their level of engagement with co-ops. And that's what the QR code there links to is our Intro to Co-ops course. And then if you want to sign up for our newsletter and receive information about our new articles, webinars, content, anything like that, you can sign up there. Also, if you want to reach out with questions or to follow up, here's my personal details. Okay, let's shift into some Q&A. Okay, Sean shares here. This topic of isomorphism is interesting. I think very important. Definitely a topic for orientation for any co-op. What is the value proposition that a co-op is bringing that is different than other existing conventional alternatives? Or is the co-op structure enough to differentiate the business and keeping everything else the same is just practical, pragmatic, and how to run a tight business? Yeah, so I would say a value proposition for a cooperative is kind of nuanced. And most consumer cooperatives and credit unions are probably going to have two value propositions. You're going to have one value proposition that's external and goes to all customers, whether they're members or non-members. Um, and within that, you could certainly as well get nuanced as being, you're a provider of services as well as a community institution that's heavily invested in the community and gives people a say in how, you know, retail or banking or insurance works. So your value proposition to the public might be a bit nuanced. Your value proposition to your membership, I think, is also worth considering because they may be a little bit different. But yeah, I would say co-ops generally will have two value propositions, one internally focused, one externally focused, and they're probably a little bit more nuanced, I would say, as slightly different corporate citizens. Um, oh, yeps. Thanks to Kevin for answering that CSR is corporate social responsibility. Appreciate that. Um, can a struggling nonprofit housing society transition over to a housing co-op? Your use of the word society makes me think that you're in British Columbia, in which case I don't think it can. Some provinces do have provisions for what's called a continuance, where you change corporate forms. Manitoba, for example, will allow a for-profit corporation to change into a cooperative, but not every province has provisions for that, and not every province provides for the movement from every type of organization to another. So I'd have to fact check myself for that one. Otherwise, it's possible for a housing co-op to get set up to buy out assets from another housing organization, and in doing so, transition. But I'd need to fact check if you wanted to do, say, a continuance and change your corporate form. Okay, I'll stop sharing. I think that might be all the questions in the chat. Did anybody else have any questions for our Q&A? Loki, go ahead.
Hi, thanks for this. Our our co-op board is in the transition period from a working board to a policy and governance board, so this is incredibly timely. Um, and so we're a producers co-op and of farmers who are across the province, and engagement is just the hardest thing. We'll get together and in person once a year, maybe once every 2 years and have a working session and come up with so many things that we want to do.
Mhm.
And then there's the list of action items and follow-ups. And that's where things stop dead. And that's the struggle. Like I'm the operations manager, so a lot of those things that we as a cooperative are going to work on together
Mhm.
become things that I do, and I update the folks who said they wanted to work on it. And yeah, I'm just wondering, like, can you refer any particular resources that
Mhm.
could help with that aside from
Mhm.
chatty but brief newsletters and direct contact? We have a monthly drop in on Zoom that people can just drop in and co-work or chat or whatever. Um, no one comes. And yeah, so I'm curious about what are the resources? How do I
Mhm.
get these farmers to engage in their co-op?
Yep. It's a good question because producer cooperatives too are such an interesting model to work with because often folks are more involved and really want to see the business succeed because it does help them with their livelihood. But at the same time, they're farmers, they're busy.
Mhm, mhm,
And so, yeah, I definitely appreciate the position they're in. There are really cool organizations that do that ongoing engagement and member discussion on an ongoing basis really well. Stocksy United is a really good example of that. It's in Victoria. It's a photography company. And it's got worker members and photographer members from across the world. They use a specific kind of platform. I'm not sure what one it is. to just ensure that there's a constant dialogue with members to get ahead of issues, and then nothing waits essentially to the AGM. They're a really good model for that. We have a good podcast um, on our website with folks from Stocksy. But to circle back to your, I guess, core question, one was around how do we maybe prioritize some of those ideas that come up to the surface, and then how do we ensure people follow through on them? I'm definitely a firm believer in, how would I put this? Like accountability and being a little bit firm in how we decide things in an organization. And so I do think the most important thing a board can do is make decisions. And so that means picking some things and not picking other things. And there's lots of ways co-ops go about that. If you've got a whole bunch of different, um, we often call them strategic imperatives. So lines of opportunity that could be pursued by the cooperative, or different objectives that could be pursued by the co-op in a given year. Um, it, Pick them. It's easy to dither. It's easy to want to try and do everything, but be realistic. Working with an expert on strategic planning can be really helpful with that. We'll have a webinar next month, actually, with our colleague Kathy Edwards, who's done a lot of strategic plans for co-ops, to offer some insight. There's lots of different voting practices that different organizations have adopted to try and better get at weighting things or prioritizing things that are maybe better than just say, 50% plus one rules a day. Concepts like quadratic voting are really good. Dotmocracy exercises are really good for helping members weigh in on big decisions. I might do a session on that one of these days, just like obscure governance practices. And then for following through, I definitely believe in assigning things to people very directly, setting targets, and holding people accountable. So having, specific targets or goals or different objectives for the entire year, and then, delineating those into Q1, 2, 3, and 4, reporting on them at either board meetings or member meetups or in, performance setting. And then if people do drop the ball, we have a realistic conversation about what's going on. Why aren't you doing this? How do we do it better? Do you need support? Do you need to step off? What's the case here? And so, yeah, kind of a carrot and the stick approach to governance, but gentler, if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
Thank you.
of course, thank you. Any other thoughts, comments, questions from folks? Mhm. Not seeing anything in the chat. Okay, we'll do a final call. Any final questions before we wrap up today's session? Going once, going twice. Okay, I will follow up with everybody here who signed up by the end of the week, I think. Oh, there's a question coming in. Minimum amount of members to start a co-op, 3. Yep, in every province in Canada, 3 individuals or 3 businesses can start a cooperative. I'll follow up with everybody by email with the recording, as well as with information for our next session, which takes place on June 16th, featuring our colleague Kathy Edwards, and that one's going to be on strategic planning. So thanks everybody for coming out. Thank you for your questions. I look forward to connecting again in the future. Have a great rest of your day.